Strange canine creatures are being spotted all over the United States and all over the world, in our forest, in valleys, near lakes, and even in our own backyards. Everything from horrific ape-like creatures to undead monstrosities. Tonight, we're going to explore 6 terrifying tales of strange creatures in the deep woods. Joining us is Oberon's Occult. My experience happened in the summer of 2015. I was driving home from work in the early evening on a 2-lane highway with woods on either side and very little traffic. As I drove along, my headlights reflected off something moving across the road only about 100 or so feet ahead of me. It was dark in color and had 4 legs, but it moved like nothing I'd ever seen before. It seemed to glide more than run or walk. The only thing that comes close is if you've ever watched a nature show where they follow wolves hunting at night. Their movements are so fluid and graceful, unlike anything we can do as humans when we move through the forest at night. I slowed down to get a better look, but did not want to stop because there's no other cars around and this thing looked pretty menacing. It kept gliding across the road until it got behind some trees, blocking my view of it, then disappeared into what sounded like a thick brush of briars, judging by how loud whatever made that noise was compared to the normal sounds you hear from wildlife. When I got home later on, still thinking about what I saw driving earlier, my wife had asked me if anything weird happened during my drive home. I told her yes. There's something out there in those woods that I've never seen before, and it was huge. She asked me what I meant and what did I see. She could tell I was a bit unnerved that evening. I described this creature to her as best as I could. When she heard me say huge, she looked at me with a very serious expression on her face and asked if this thing looked like a dog. At first, I thought maybe my wife was just trying to make fun of me for being so scared that when I saw whatever it was moving across the road earlier. But she kept asking more about its appearance, specifically saying things like, was it walking on 2s or on all 4s? And other questions along those lines. Things that nobody else would know unless they were curious themselves. That's when she told me some years ago, while living in another town here, about 45 minutes or so away, an uncle of hers lived out back behind his house where he raised dogs for breeding purposes. One night, after everybody went to bed, he heard noises coming from outside, so he got up out of bed to check them out. As soon as he stepped onto his porch, something came running up towards him from the darkness beyond his lighted porch area. He said it was so fast and huge that he had to duck down behind his porch railing to avoid being clawed or grabbed by whatever this thing was. He said it stopped right in front of him on the other side of the railing, sniffing around for a few seconds, then retreating off into the darkness. He told my wife's family about what had happened, and they all thought he must have been dreaming or hallucinating from the lack of sleep. He is an insomniac, after all. But after hearing how I described this creature moving across the road earlier tonight, my wife confirmed that her uncle was telling something true because what he saw aesthetically fits perfectly with what I saw tonight. She also added that nobody else in their family has ever seen anything like this since then either. I'd asked her if they had any missing dogs after her uncle's encounter, and she went on to tell me yes. Several went missing over time, starting soon afterward, and continued happening sporadically, up until just recently. My wife is pretty sure something took those dogs because they weren't found anywhere nearby. They just disappeared without a trace. They are not known to wander off on their own, nor are they kept up where they can get out. She thinks that this thing took the dogs and might be responsible for more sightings around the area, as well as occasional strange noises heard coming from the woods at night. I've never told anybody else about this experience before now. I've always been afraid of being made fun of or even laughed at for believing in something like this, when no one else believes these things, especially since it's so hard to prove anything by pointing out sightings alone. But after hearing my wife describe her uncle's encounter, I know she wouldn't lie to me. The curiosity, the demeanor of her body told me otherwise. It just makes me feel a little bit better knowing that someone else close to me can at least believe what I experienced. And if it helps with other people who have to live and deal with this sort of thing, well, all the better, I guess.
September 1999. First off, I would like to keep my name confidential, just for the fact that this happened on an Air Force base, and I don't know who reads this stuff. This happened sometime in September of '99. I forget the exact date. It was early in the month, though. It was between 2 and 3 a.m. I was a security forces airman working third shift on base patrol. Now, mind you, this is an Air National Guard base that I worked at full time. It's on the north side of Duluth, Minnesota, next to the international airport. North to northeast is nothing but large wooded areas, forest areas. Third shift on the base was pretty boring, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and us full-timers worked a skeleton crew, usually only 5 or 6 of us on third shift. I was in the patrol truck doing my usual rounds, checking doors and fence lines. Late at night on the north side of the base was usually creepy enough when patrolling by yourself. Anyways, I was on this road, driving towards our baseball field, when my headlights caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me. They were almost eye level with me, and I was sitting in an F-150. Around this time, a few of the guys had been seeing this huge buck around the property, like a 16-pointer or something around that size. I was about 80 yards or so when I saw these eyes reflecting back at me, so I'm thinking it was a big deer. I gotta see this thing. So I hit the gas and started speeding towards the field. This is where it all happened so fast. It's almost hard to explain. There was a little slope behind the baseball field. It sloped down, probably about 12 to 15 feet into a brush line. The brush went about 30 feet, then turned into a thick tree line. The brush was probably armpit high to me, and pretty tough to traverse through, being so thick. As I turned into the baseball field and turned the truck towards the thing, I just caught the rear end of the thing leaping down the slope, below the line of sight of my headlights. The thing was no more than about 20 feet ahead of me when it leapt. All I got to look at was the back end of the thing, and it was big. The best I can do to describe it is to say that it has wolf or dog-like in nature. It had a long tail, longer than 2 feet. The hind legs looked exactly like that of a dog's, same with the black paws, but the paws were huge. They were bigger than my hands for sure. The hair, fur was wavy, yet matted and thick. The color was blondish or very light brown. I didn't notice any gray in it, but this all happened within about 2 to 3 seconds. I sat in my patrol truck for a couple of seconds, confused and thinking, I know what I saw, but it couldn't have been what I saw. So I hopped out with my flashlight and my M16 rifle and walked to the edge of the slope. All I heard was the thing running through the woods in front of me, heading in a northwest direction. And this thing sounded like a moose charging through the trees. It made a lot of noise. That's when I started to get really scared, thinking, if this is some sort of wolf or whatever it could be, my M16 isn't going to do a thing to this animal. So I jumped back into my patrol truck as fast as I could and headed back to the SF headquarters. I never told any of the other members about this for fear of ridicule or being called crazy. There is no way I misidentified this thing. I'm a trained observer, an avid hunter, and have worked with animal rehabilitation with the Minnesota DNR in the past. I know my animals in the North Woods extremely well. I saw exactly what I saw, and that was the back end of a large wolf or dog thing that basically had its eyes level with mine, while I was in a patrol truck. The back end was definitely much larger than any of the largest deer or black bears I've seen. The points I remember the clearest were the tail and back paws, as well as the texture and color of the hair, fur. This is my story. I have never told it to anyone in fear of ridicule. I swear it to be the truth.
I went solo camping in July of 2016 in the Kettle Moraine State Forest, here in southeastern Wisconsin. It was a Friday night, and I went on a weekend pass for my job, so I had all day Saturday to play around with before heading back Sunday morning. I set up camp along one of the trails near the main road through this forest. As it got darker, there were no cars or other people around me besides some deer that had wandered around every once in a while. The air seemed very still and quiet, except for an occasional hoot owl off in the distance and crickets chirping nearby. When it got completely dark out, my headlamp lit up only about 10 or so feet ahead of me, where I had pitched my tent among some tall grass, weeds, and trees at about 2 or so miles into this trail system, since there's no light pollution here. The rest of everything beyond that circle of light is pitch black darkness, and there were a lot of dense trees. They're everywhere. Mostly pine, but also oak, as well, scattered all throughout. Now, if you know anything about camping alone like that, you'll understand why I felt uneasy being surrounded by these trees like that at night. They cast such deep shadows across most of their trunks and branches. I had been sitting outside my tent for about 20 or so minutes, just looking around with my headlamp on, sipping beer, when I noticed something moving in the trees to my left, or north. It was hard to see because of how dark it was out there, but I could tell that whatever moved through those pines was not another deer, squirrel, or bird. It seemed too big for that. I grabbed some light from inside my tent and shined it in that direction while still keeping an eye on whatever it was with the beam of light coming off the backside of one of its trunks. The best way to describe this thing is like a werewolf. Its body looked very canine-like, yet muscular at the same time. Its fur coloration looked brownish-black, but not uniform across its body, as if patches of flesh and fur may have been missing here or there, or it had been plagued with mange, which made me think, maybe this animal is deformed or sick. But then again, why would it be hanging around such an area? Anyway, after shining a little bit more light into its eyes than I probably should have, thinking, oops, this creature quickly moved behind another tree trunk down below where I could not see it anymore, without leaving camp myself, and I was not about to follow it. After it disappeared, I just sat there for a minute or two thinking and shaking my head. What on earth was that? I'd been hearing some strange vocalizations in the woods earlier on while I was hiking around, but they seemed to stop after this creature had left. It's hard to describe exactly what these sounds were like, other than maybe an owl hooting or crying at the same time, except it was much more human-like, if that makes any sense. I simply got into my tent and zipped up for bed, shortly after with 3 layers of clothing still on, because it was pretty chilly. As I lay down, all the noises started up again from before, only louder now, since I was not outside. This went on until about 4 a.m., when suddenly everything went quiet. The next morning, I packed up camp and headed back home without seeing anyone else or anything unusual during daylight hours. After everything went quiet again at 4 a.m., I was not about to peek my head out and see if my good old friend was back. I decided to try and force my body into sleep, and somehow, miraculously, it worked.
This happened to me when I was 10 or 11. I'm just about to turn 20 now, but I'll never forget what happened that day. I was at my grandparents' house, who were watching me for the day. They live out in a mixture of farmland and woods in rural Wisconsin. Their yard is mostly surrounded by farmland, but to the right side of the yard is a couple of acres of woods and swamp. It was a really hot, muggy morning in July. I was standing out on the deck, shooting at some cans with my BB gun. All of a sudden, I got the sense something was wrong. It felt like I was being watched. I started scanning the tree line, and down at the edge of the trees, about 60 yards away by the swamp, was this thing standing that I can only describe as a dogman. It was about 7 feet tall, covered with shaggy, gray hair, had the classic dogman face, the long snout, pointed ears on top of its head, yellow eyes, and it was very muscular. It was standing on 2 legs, but it appeared to be sort of leaning up against a tree. We locked eyes, and while it was probably only 10 seconds, it felt like hours. It sounds silly, but I felt the thing had a sinister grin on its face. It was extremely intimidating. I know that had that thing wanted to kill me, It easily could have done that. I could relive this encounter at my age now with a shotgun instead of a BB gun, and I'd still be just as terrified as I was then. It definitely had a very negative and sinister vibe to it. After locking eyes with the thing, it just bolted off on two legs, through some of the swamp and emerged farther down the tree line and then ran off into the forest. At first, I thought it might have been one of my older cousins playing a joke on me, who lived nearby, but then I realized there was no way they could be wearing a suit, be 7 feet tall, and clear the swamp as fast as that thing did. I wasn't gonna tell Grandma and Grandpa I saw a werewolf down by the swamp. They'd never believe me. So I just kept my mouth shut and tried to carry on with my day there. Well, later that afternoon, I was talking to my aunt and she brought up the fact that she had heard strange noises the night before. When I asked what they sounded like, she said it was a lot of snarling and growling, and it kind of sounded like an animal being attacked.
I believe that I encountered a Wendigo or Skinwalker-like creature when I went out camping in the deep woods with some friends of mine. Before I get to the story, though, I'll fill you in on some details about me. I'm a pretty big guy, 6'8" and 300 pounds. I've been in the Army for 3 years now. I've seen some combat before. I'm also an avid hunter as well as outdoorsman. This happened 2 years ago when me and some friends went camping out in the deep woods of Minnesota. We made camp at roughly 1 p.m. on this day, so we decided to go hunting since there was plenty of light left to do so. And where we were was about 20 miles away from any civilization. Me being the only one that knew how to hunt properly took my friend A with me because he wanted to as well. The others tagged along. We walked approximately 5 miles into the denser woods where we split up for better odds of finding some game near us. Not anything major. I'm talking smaller game like rabbit. There was nothing around me but trees. No animals or birds could be heard either which way, which is odd, considering at the time it was mating season, spring. Anyway, I kept walking until I found a smaller clearing that looked like something may have been bedding down here recently. And it probably wasn't good if whatever it was left tracks bigger than mine. I mean, I'm not kidding. The tracks were huge. They were human-like, but they were twice as long as normal. A chill had ran down my spine when I realized what I was looking at, that it was not an animal or a person, but something else. Before I could think about it anymore, a loud scream erupted from behind me, and had been screaming for help and sounded like a man was in trouble. We ran back the way we came to find him standing there with his rifle pointed into a small clearing that looked like something tore through it. Like whatever did this wasn't human. I'll never forget what it looked like. It stood there on 2 legs, just as tall as me, 6'8", and had long arms hanging past its knees. The face resembled more of an ape or dog than anything else, with huge canine teeth. Kind of baboonish, if that makes any sense. While its mouth was protruding, its eyes were black and emotionless, and its skin appeared to be peeling off, revealing dry, rotting flesh underneath, which made kind of a squishing, crunching sound when walking toward us. It wanted us. It charged at its full speed, screaming this sort of war cry, while swinging one arm around trying to grab both of us. And somehow, simultaneously, we fired our rifles until they were empty, then reloaded only again to see this thing coming right at us. It's as if the bullets did not affect it. That is when I used my knife instead of my rifle because I knew that this was going to be my only hope in close combat. Whatever creature this thing was chased us for miles until we fell unconscious. We were awakened by my other friends and driven to the hospital. I have no idea what it was, but had we stuck around or had this thing got to us, I'm pretty sure this creature would have dragged us both to a nearby lake and probably drowned us or ate us, or we would just turn up missing. I know this sounds like some crazy fake story, but I swear, I still have nightmares about that thing.
August 2008. My wife and I were driving back to our cabin we have in North Woods after visiting friends in town. It was hot, muggy summer night. but it was cooling down fast, which made it start to get foggy. The road went about a half-mile through a spruce bog, then up a hill to where a farm was on the right. Hardwoods were on the left. I was in my mid-50s at the time and did not believe in things like what we were about to see. Out of the fog from the farm field, going from right to left, came a creature. The creature was about 8 to 10 feet off the ground. The best way to describe what we saw would be to say it looked like a person who had jumped off a trampoline and took off with their arms stretched out in front of them, with their legs bent. It was upright, however, and was covered all over with fur. It was not a coyote or a wolf, but looked like a cross between a man and some kind of canine. It had pointy ears and a long snout. My wife later said that head reminded her of ancient Egyptian god with a dog head. It landed flat on its feet directly in front of my wife's van, no more than 20 feet away. The craziest thing is, it landed and jumped like a kangaroo, flying back off into the fog. Its arms were still sticking straight out in front of it. It did not act or look like any canine we know of. We had been going slowly because of the fog. As soon as she saw that thing, she stopped the van. We just looked at each other like, did we really just see that? However, we did see it, and it still freaks us out to this day. Another weird thing is, we both felt that it was not of this world. It did not move naturally, and that was just the feeling we got. We don't tell many people about what we saw because the people we have told don't believe or want to believe we saw what we saw. However, I did tell a good friend of mine who didn't laugh because he said when he was a little kid, his father, who was a logger, used to tell him about loggers in the woods seeing Dogman. I'm so glad I found this website. I see that other rational people have seen similar creatures. Like some others, I was with someone who witnessed it too. It must be really difficult for someone who sees one of these things by themselves to try and explain to others what they saw. This is a difficult thing for me to write down on paper. I had no idea what a cryptid was until my son told me about his encounter just before it aired on your show. All these years, I have thought that what I had seen was just a very deformed bear. Just so you know, I was driving that night, and I never drink and drive. I was 100% sober. I haven't even talked about my encounter since it happened, until I told my son. Since then, I have told my best friend. She encouraged me to contact you after we listened to my son's episode together. Most evenings, just about an hour before dark, some of us enjoyed going for deer rides. We had a route we would always use. It started out on Rustic Road, which was southwest of our cabin on Long Lake, just south of Danbury, Wisconsin. The route took us to a place that went through a wildlife preserve, and then we ended up on the road that goes from Hinckley, Minnesota to Danbury, Wisconsin. The road through the preserve always made me uncomfortable because it was a swampy bog on both sides of the road. It was a narrow gravel road, and in order to turn around, you would need to go down a very narrow drive to a parking area for hunters. I had only been in one of those parking areas once, and it creeped me out. We never saw deer on that road, so we typically went fast in that area. We would have avoided that gravel road altogether, but we always see a deer just before the preserve and just after. On this evening, it was just my sister-in-law and I that went on the deer ride. This happened 15 or 16 years ago, so we did not have cell phones. Sometimes we would take cameras to take pictures of deer. This night we didn't have a camera with us. It was a hot night and we had our windows down because the air conditioner wasn't working. I was driving a large car, a 1998 Cadillac. We had just started down that creepy road when we noticed something black on the road about a half-mile ahead of us. We were driving pretty fast. As we got closer, it appeared to be dark gray in color. It also appeared to have an elongated muzzle. It had its back to us, but it was a little sideways, so we could tell it was eating something in the road. I stopped the car and just kept my foot on the brake. This animal had very wide, muscular shoulders, and its fur was longer than a bear's. Its ears were pointy like a German shepherd's and stood straight up on the top of its head. This animal had hands. It was holding a dead rabbit, I think. I was talking to Amy. I said, "What is that?" I think I was verbalizing every thought that came into my head. I was totally freaked out. The animal noticed us. It started to turn its head. That's when I turned on my headlights. It wasn't dark yet, but I wanted to see this thing better. It turned and faced my car. The headlights caught its eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Its eyes glowed reddish orange in the headlights. I freaked. To me, this creature was demonic in nature. Then it stood up straight on its back legs. As this thing moved, it was jerky, like it wasn't comfortable in its own skin. It was not a natural movement. The animal sprinted at my car. It took at least 6 steps. I gunned my car right at it. I was in a panic. I was terrified. It turned right, still upright, then dropped to all fours. Its legs had an odd bend in them, like backward knees. I just screamed, "What is that?" It ran into the swamp and I got the hell out of there. We stopped on the road to our cabin. By then it was dark. When we stopped, Amy and I both cried. We couldn't stop shaking. We talked about what we had just seen. We both agreed we would tell people we had seen a bear. To be honest, at that time, I honestly thought it was a deformed bear. Today I know it was not. I am no longer in denial. What I saw, I cannot understand or explain. It was just plain evil in nature. So wrong. So very wrong.
If you guys enjoyed tonight's episode, and if you guys enjoyed Oberon Occult's reading, you can go ahead and check out his channel in the link below. Otherwise, go ahead and leave a comment down below, slap that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more terrifying tales coming your way.